Mixing with Mike plugin of the week is the Slate Digital FG Stress. This demo, the music is by Tyler Boone. You can reach him at Tyler Boone Music and on Coast Records, coast-records.com. Slate Digital has finally released the FG Stress. This is a modeling of the distressor, and they've been able to license the look and feel of it on the outside, so you get a very similar look to what you see on the original. It shows up in the mix rack just like you would expect, and if you're familiar with the distressor was a unit that was released, the ELA was released in the mid-90s. Dave Durr was the designer. It actually, what was really amazing about it, and the reason why it became so successful so quickly during that time was that it really captured the characteristic of analog compression. And the thing to remember is that, even by the time you got to the mid 90s, when you had some of these compressors, that vintage compressors, LA2As, 1176s, some of these things are decades old, and a lot of them were out of production. And there were companies that were making new things to replace them. So and that's kind of part of the genesis of this. But what it does is it really captures the essential analog characteristics of stuff like the 1176, the LA2A, as I mentioned, and another one called the Gain Brain, which was an interesting dynamics processor by Valley people. So there's some really cool things that kind of go along with this. And so what Slate has done is actually a real true one-to-one modeling, which is kind of cool because usually they'll go in and they'll add extra features and kind of tweak some things and kind of morph it into something different. So this is probably the most straightforward, real capturing of the original. Now, what you have here in the basic design is an input and an output gain. It's very much an 1176 style setup in that it has a fixed threshold, and so you drive more input gain to push more signal through the threshold. You have selected ratios, as you see here. You have attack and release times, and the attack and release times are very similar to what you get on the 1176, especially on the attack end. So it's like 50 microseconds on the fast attack side, 30 milliseconds on the slow end of the attack side, which actually the 1176 is all less than a millisecond, but that's a longer story. The release, 50 milliseconds up to 3.5 seconds, so you have a pretty broad range of that there. Although you don't see the millisecond readings, you just have to kind of follow the numbers. So you have to do this a little bit more by ear. And then you have the output control, which you do for balancing the output gain. Now, so with that basic design and with the settings here, there are a couple things that are worth looking at. You can flip the ratio here just by kind of toggling through. If you right click on it, it will go backwards. So you can toggle backwards. You can't tell that I'm doing a right click, but that is a right click. I'm just telling you. There's a couple of other shortcuts which are kind of cool, or one that's really cool. If you hold the shift key, because if I spin the input gain, it will not affect the output gain. But if I hold the shift key, what'll happen is you'll notice that it will switch both of them, right? So as I pull, raise one, it will lower the other, or vice versa. And so now, generally, the 1176 design would be that if you drive more input gain, you're getting more gain reduction, and so the output's probably not going to be that far off, but that actually ends up being a nice feature to have, so just kind of note that. So you have that basic layout, you have the ratio controls, and then you have a detector section. So this is essentially the sidechain filtering. So internally, the input signal splits, and then you can apply a high-pass filter. And so the high-pass filter on the detector circuit is set to 86 hertz. And then now this is important because there is actually, you can also insert that high pass filter onto the audio signal. Okay, so, and that's different, in which case it's set to 80 hertz when you do it that way. And it uses this interesting filter called a Bessel filter. So a Bessel filter, instead of being sort of a linear dB per octave, like first order is 6 dB, second order is 12 dB, third order 18 dB per octave, etc. What this does is it sort of starts off slow and then finishes off really fast. So it has kind of like has a kind of cool curve to it. And that ends up being very musical and very cool for vocals and stuff. So, and you can include it on both if you want to. There's also a peaking section here on the side chain. So what this does is it boosts like right around 6K, And what that allows you to do is it allows you to grab like harshness or sibilance frequencies and use the compression to kind of track that and follow to that. So with these two things, you can help the low frequency, if there's a lot of low frequency energy, from sort of clogging up the movement of the compression. And you can use this peaking filter to make it more responsive to particular things. And then the link. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because the original hardware unit is actually a mono single rack unit device. But there's a version of it where you can link them, where you just patch a cable, literally patch a cable from one to the other, and you can link them. So essentially what will end up happening is the sidechain circuits will receive the same signal, and so the compression will be identical on both channels. That's the basic idea. So if you don't link it, what will happen is if there's a differential, say something compressing that drives the compression more on the left side than the right side, then you'll get more compression on the left side versus the right side. And depending upon how responsive you make the compression, that may be a really cool thing that helps to widen the imaging, or it may create problems by causing one side to swell versus the other in a negative way. So it's situational, but that's something to know about. Now, there's a natural harmonic distortion characteristic that's built in to the unit itself. So as you drive signal, it's meant to really capture analog characteristics, but there are two distortion modes that are built into the EL8, and the first one is Distortion 2. So you have like a sort of standard distortion setup, and then you have two distortions. The first one, or Distortion 2, is more of a tube-like second harmonic distortion. So the second harmonic is 1 octave above the original note. So it's usually kind of very clean and warming. And then Distortion 3 adds a third harmonic along with the second harmonic, and that harmonically ends up being a fifth. So it has a very musical sound, and that's a little bit more like a tape saturation characteristic. So as you, if you select these, you can, toggle between them, and you'll see a little meter over here, which will show you where it's at. Like if that yellow LED lights up, it's at a 1% harmonic distortion, and if the red line, you're getting I don't know, like over 3% or something like that. So got gain reduction meter right here. That's all the basics of it, and the only added feature which doesn't exist on the original is a mix wet dry. So let's have a listen. Now I have an initial setup here that is just on the mix bus. So I'm just going to go instrumental here for a second, just so I can talk and not have the vocals interfere. What I have set up here, let me just actually switch over because I've futzed around with some different settings. This is just basically like a standard kind of mix gluing type of thing. And this would be something you might do like with an SSL bus compressor where you have like a long attack time, 20, 30 milliseconds. So that would be on the attack time towards like, 8 to 10, because 30 milliseconds is on the long side. And then just a couple dB of gain reduction, and all it does with a quick release helps to kind of make the mix kind of pump and breathe. So let's kind of listen just to that for a second. So I'll start with a bypass and then bring it in. So one thing that is unique about this, if you start to work with it, you'll notice that there's like a 1-to-1 mode. Now on the EL8X, there's a feature called British mode, and it shows up on a separate switch. And when you switch to 1-to-1 and you flip that in, it simulates or emulates the characteristics of the all buttons mode in the 1176. But this is not set up to do that. So just so you're aware. So if you're using the 1-to-1 characteristic, you're primarily doing it just to get some harmonic distortion or to drive some things a little bit. But when you switch between the different ratios, you get different characteristic sounds. The 10-to-1 ratio is simulates an optical compression, and you can see like a release time of 0 on the release, and an attack time of 10 helps to give you that characteristic sound of an optical limiter. I'm going to show you that. There's also a really cool feature. If you hold the shift key and you click on that, it will automatically set the attack and release to those settings for an opto setup. So I'll show you that. We'll set it up on something like the base, which is kind of a classic place where you would use something like that. So I want to toggle through a couple of the ratios. The thing is that when you flip through the ratios, it actually also shifts the threshold a little bit. So, and the idea being that you can switch between the ratios and you'll still get more gain reduction as you go up the line, but not as much as you normally would. So let's have a listen to some of that. So you can notice immediately how when you go to the 10-to-1, most of these are pretty similar. They start to get a little bit more dense as you kind of go through. So I was kind of preferring like 3 or 4-to-1 over 2-to-1 in this particular case, and then the 20-to-1. So similar type of thing to what you get with the 1176 when you switch to that 20-to-1 ratio. It's not like the gain reduction goes through the roof. So that helps you to kind of audition things. And that actually sounds quite cool as well. And then the nuke obviously ends up being a different thing because that's more of a brick wall limiter kind of thing. But with that, you got the basic setup, and you could just functionally just use it like this. Now we can also add in a bit of distortion here. And so it kind of cuts a little bit on the transient there, which is what it's exactly designed to do. So it's kind of like a soft clipping kind of thing. And this may not be the right place for it, or the right exact place to do it. In fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you something. Let's take this off here and focus just on the drum sounds for a second. And I'll show you something that's more specific to that. So we have a distortion set up here. This is something where, if you wanted to go a little bit crazy with it, might be a place where you could go a little nuclear, I guess. So obviously it's excessive pumping and breathing. I'm trying to find a setting that it's basically a little bit more musical, and then I can drive a little distortion in here. And then this is where the mix control comes in, so I can just use that to kind of mix in some of that. You know what, I kind of have to push the output here. And then you could just kind of mix it in. I think what was happening there is that I almost wanted to hear that type of thing in a send return configuration, so I could have paralleled the stem here that I have it on and done something like that, and then I could have blended it in. Same basic idea. So all I was doing here was just turning the output gain up so I could keep more of the dry signal level and then balancing in there like about, a third with that. But that's like one example of some place you could do it. Things like that actually work really well if you have something that like a snare drum that just sounds awful and you just kind of want to mangle it into something. That nuke setting works really, really cool. It also works well to kind of just like really pull a sound together and make it super aggressive and stuff like that. We could probably, let's see, we also got guitars here. So let's take a look. That type of setting may work here as well. So this is just something I had set up, which is sort of like a kind of like what they would call like an over easy kind of setting. So there's a variety of different modes that you can go into to create different sonic characteristics. So if you wanted to go opto mode here, like so I'll hold the shift key and notice what happens here to the attack and release settings, right? So now, and you see it flashes. So now it sets it to a classic optical mode. Right. So, and that's actually, just quickly kind of putting this together. I probably wouldn't go there, but just to kind of show you what that's all about. Where I had it before on the A setting was more when you have it in that 2-to-1, 3-to-1, up to 6-to-1. It works almost a bit more of like an over easy style. If you set the attack slow and on the release kind of on the fast side, you could also kind of go for a Fairchild type of setup. Where you have, a 6-to-1 ratio here. And let's kind of set this up here. So this is stuff that is right out of the manual recommendations of the Distortion. And this can kind of help you to set up some of the characteristics of it. So this like 6-to-1 with kind of medium attack and a faster release. And let's just see here. I'll leave that off or maybe put in the tubes because there would definitely be a tube type of sound. So I'll use the shift key. All right, so it's like a basic setup that can kind of work. So it gives you some settings that are meant to not be emulations of those things, but exhibit some of the characteristics that to kind of lean you in that kind of direction. So with the bass sound, this would be the classic place for like an LA2A style thing. So we can kind of take this and we have it like an opto mode, right? So it's clearly an opto mode here. right? So you can get that. Like the whole thing about the optical and why that works with basses and low end instruments in particular also works really great with vocals. And although this is not, it's giving you more the characteristics of that, not like emulating, the exact sound of an optical compressor like the LA2A. But what it does is it adds like a clarity that makes the low end image. So I went there. I mean, that particular setup has like transformers and tubes. So I'm going to Distortion 2 on that one just to kind of give a little bit more of the analog characteristics from tubes. One of the final things that I wanted to focus on here was the vocal and kind of doing a bit more of like a pump and breathe style compression. So let me zoom in on this one here.
Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake. Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake. If I can't have you, baby, my heart will surely break.
Unfortunately, the lines
I see you
aren't
walking
that
down
close
the
together.
street, oh, short skirt and nothing but bare knees.
So you could see, like with that fast release, sort of medium fast attack. This is very much this is like in a 6-to-1 ratio. It's not in all buttons mode, but it gives you a bit of that reactive kind of quick bounce back type of thing. I have no distortion or anything in here. I could also do this like in a 20-to-1.
Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake.
And this can really level out a vocal where you want a vocal to kind of really focus and be up front.
Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake.
Right, so it focuses it, makes it very clear.
If I can't have you, baby, my heart will surely break.
So that tape saturation might actually work pretty well too.
Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake.
All right, so I'm going to do something exceedingly dangerous here. Just put this in on other tracks, other two vocal parts blindly. Never a good idea. And then let's kind of listen to, I think I have all of these guys more or less lined up here in a row and get an idea whether any of this stuff makes sense.
Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake. Every time standing next to you, oh, I begin to tremble and shake. If I can't have you, baby, my heart will surely break. I see you walking down the street, oh, short skirt and nothing but bare knees. I see you walking down the street, oh, short skirt and nothing but bare knees. If it was up to me, girl, I'd take you home, we'd never sleep.
So you can see there's like a lot of ways that you can use this. You could just, and I'm putting it on stems, but when you dig into it on individual instruments, kick drums, snare drums, basses, individual guitar sounds, it's an incredibly flexible compressor. And it's worth really studying how it works and some of the different characteristics and playing around with it for a while. It's very different from any other compressor that you use, in particular with the ratio, because as you step through the different ratios, you will get a different characteristic sound. But this is an excellent emulation, no doubt. I was kind of surprised that Slate made it so true to the original and did not go overboard adding features. So I'm really happy about that. Easily the best emulation that I've heard from the Slate collection. So there you have it, a really good one. Plugin of the week, Slate Digital FG Stress. Remember, music by Tyler Boone at tylerboonmusic.com and Coast Records, coast-records.com. Plugin of the week.